Happy Sabbath and welcome to Sunday. This is Father Mark over at Christ Redeemer Catholic Church in Thibodaux, welcoming you to the third week of Lent and welcoming you to our third week in our podcast series entitled Intentional. And for us to appreciate where we are and where we're going in this third week of Intentional, let's recap the first 2 weeks so that we can have a greater appreciation of what God's going to say to us this week. In week one of Intentional, in week one of Lent, we focused on temptation. That was the readings given to us on that first Sunday as Jesus was in the desert to face temptation. And what we were trying to do in that first week was help us appreciate why God allows temptation, how we are to respond in temptation, and the role that temptation plays in our spiritual growth. The second week of Intentional, we talked about just the reality that sometimes God doesn't answer your prayer, and sometimes we're waiting on God. And why is it that God might delay his response, and what is it that we are to do whenever we're waiting? Those two things are important because, as I mentioned to you last week, we're never going to be more tempted than when we're waiting on God to answer a prayer. So week one really kind of set a backdrop that helped us understand week two. And likewise, if week two is about dealing with the temptations and the frustrations of waiting on God, then that now brings us into week three, which is what do we do when we feel stuck in our spiritual lives? At Mass today, we're going to look at the woman who was at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, and she was certainly stuck in sin. She was certainly stuck in a pattern in life. She was a woman stuck in her relationship with God. You and I can often feel like we are stuck. And you may feel there now, or you may actually feel that because things are happening during Lent, you got some momentum. And it's just now is the time when things are going well for us to have a conversation about what we're going to do when things are going in the opposite direction. In other words, now is the time when we want to prepare for what are we going to do whenever we feel stuck. And of course, if you know someone who's stuck, or if you are stuck, then this week is also going to be very helpful. Let me just offer one word of encouragement for us today to kind of set the stage for us, and then we'll unpack things during the week together. When we're stuck in our spiritual lives, or when we're off, you might say interiorly, our senses, the way that we hear God or sense God or feel God, are also going to be affected. And it's in moments where you don't feel God's presence, or you don't feel lots of things in your spiritual life, that we can be most tempted and even deceived. Let me give you an analogy. Vertigo is a physiological sensation, condition, you might say, when you can't trust your senses. Vertigo, it feels like you're falling, right? It down seems like it's up, and up seems like it's down, and your senses, your physical senses, are thrown off. This can be obviously dangerous for anybody, but when you're flying a plane, it can be very dangerous. You can't trust your senses, and so they tell pilots that if you're experiencing vertigo, you always fly the plane on the instruments. You read the instruments in front of you rather than trusting your senses, and you fly the plane off the instruments. In fact, may he rest in peace, it's what actually took the life of J.F. Kennedy Jr., John F. Kennedy Jr. He died as he was flying his own plane, and he had vertigo, and that's what led to his death. It's a dangerous condition, right? So they say to pilots, you trust the instruments rather than your senses. When you're stuck in the spiritual life, you're going to be deceived by your senses. You're not going to feel God. You're not going to hear God. And so just like we have physical senses, we can see, touch, taste, and feel. We have spiritual senses that allow us to do that in our spiritual life. We can see, you might say things in our imagination. We can hear God's voice on the inside of us. We can feel God's presence in our spiritual life. When you're stuck, it's going to be difficult to trust those senses. So you trust the instruments, just like the pilot doesn't trust his senses. He instead trusts the instruments because his senses are off. When you're stuck, your senses are going to be off, and so you need to trust the instruments. What are the instruments? Well, that's the wisdom of the church. We get that from St. Ignatius of Loyola, who at some point in his life, as we get to know him this week, wrote the spiritual exercises, and he gave us some wisdom of what to do whenever you're stuck, and we're going to unpack that this week. The one thing that I would encourage us with today is to either ask yourself if you're stuck or if you know someone else who's stuck in their spiritual life. And I would simply encourage them to be patient. Just be patient whenever you're stuck. That's the most important thing. God will eventually speak to you. God will eventually reveal himself to you. And there's always something for us to learn, even from the seasons when we're stuck. Let's trust the instruments that tell us to be patient today. Come on back tomorrow, as this week we're going to unpack St. Ignatius of Loyola's rules for the discernment of spirits. We're going to unpack what is it that we are supposed to do whenever we're stuck. And if you yourself are looking for a message, if you're looking for something that can carry you, I want to encourage you to maybe join us at Christ the Redeemer. We've got a great message for you this week. We've got a great family, and I really believe that God is doing something in the lives of all of us. We're ordinary people on the journey, so if you're looking for a church home, I want to encourage you to join us over on Talbot Avenue. Looking forward to being with you this week. Looking forward to sharing a message with you tomorrow. And until we either see you at Mass or we get together tomorrow for the podcast, God bless you.